Hello. In this episode of AS for Architecture, I spoke with philosopher Chris Younès, professor at the National School of Architecture of Paris-La Villette, and at the École Spéciale d'Architecture, Paris, Silver Medal of the Academy of Architecture in 2005, and Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur since 2014, about the 2024 translation of her book, Architectures of Existence, Ethics, Aesthetics, Politics, published by Routledge. Drawing from Ecosophy, Chris examines how spaces shape our experiences, identities, and our relationships with both human and non-human worlds. In an era of apparently endlessly overlapping crises and social fragmentation, products of the way we expect to live, the way we want to live, and the systems we cultivate to deliver these visions, can architecture help us to reimagine new ways of living together?
A is for Architecture, a podcast about architecture, buildings, urban culture and space.
Hello and welcome to another episode of AS for Architecture. I am delighted to be joined today by the eminent theorist, Professor Chris Younès, and we'll be talking about your very beautiful book, Architectures of Existence, Ethics, Aesthetics, Politics, which you published with Routledge and was translated by Cosette Griffin. When was this published, Chris?
First, it was translated into last year. I wrote it about 10 years ago. Or maybe less.
Maybe less.
I don't remember exactly the date. Because, you know, it was an essay. It was a long time to write this very tiny essay because it was about this question to inhabit, in fact.
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean to inhabit on Earth?
And do you feel that thought, that philosophy, you have to experience it before you can write about it?
Exactly. I needed a lot of time to experience the connection between architecture and philosophy.
Could you tell us a little bit about your background, please, Chris?
Yes.
Where were you trained in architecture? And I suppose as a philosopher, what is your lineage as a philosopher?
Yes. In fact, I was educated in the University of Lyon in France. It was a big time at this moment for this university in Lyon because we had big, very important professors as Henri Maldinet, Deleuze, Dagonier, and it was a very interesting, motivating time to think about the philosophy of the philosophy. And so I was educated in this discipline for a long time because I prepared a PhD, and after I had to prepare what we call in France habilitation à diriger des recherches. It's something we do after the PhD, and so it was a long time about the question of what's about the existence and the philosophy in a fact.
I see. At Lyon, what was the dominant school of philosophy at the time you were studying and researching?
At this time, it was mixed, in fact. It was mixed because we had the history of philosophy about a professor, Rhodys Lewis, was a very, very known about what she did about Platon, you know, the antiquity in a fact, but also about Kant, so about modern philosophy. But at the same time, we had the connection and the education about phenomenology. Phenomenology, it was a lot about Hegel and Husserl with Professor Maldinet, and about this philosophy with Deleuze was very different, in fact, because he was working about Spinoza, Bergson, but in a new way of thinking history of architecture. Because, as he explained, it was not only to teach what this philosopher wrote, but it was to think, to interpret it, to have a lot of interpretation about them. And so it was a very mixed education, in fact, in philosophy. It was very, very, very motivating.
Yeah, I imagine so. And do you feel, in terms of your own development as as a philosopher of space, that you've balanced these two, this kind of
Yeah.
phenomenological and Deleuzian?
Yes, you're right. Absolutely, it was because this question of existence, we can understand it as a lot about phenomenology, of course, about
Hmm.
experience, but at the same time, we can have this Deleuzian point of view because it was very interesting the way Deleuze was thinking, was teaching, because he wanted to think what was happening in a fact, and to develop a new way of thinking. And so it was interesting to have this both of this philosophy at the same time.
Why do you feel that there was this move, or this energy to develop this cut? Why was this cut? I suppose this comes to the first question that I'm interested in is, what motivates this philosophical position that you've taken? What is the driving force behind it? Because I think perhaps, I do not mean to be rude at all, but
Not I
I
know.
think that for a lot of people who are perhaps not involved in philosophy, it doesn't relate back to experience conditions particularly much, like what people experience in their daily lives. And yet your book is driven by a desire to be applied. Is that right? Is it an applied philosophy?
Yes, it's an applied philosophy. That's right. And it was interesting with with phenomenology. It was the willing to think about the daily life, about what we were feeling uh, with the body and
Hmm.
with the mind at the same time. But at this moment, phenomenology was there is a kind of fight between phenomenology and structuralism,
Hmm.
and it was very different. And Deleuze, in a way, began more or less as a structuralist, but at the same time, he was already inventing a new way to be with the history of philosophy, and he was working about Bergson because of the fluidity of things, but also about Spinoza, Nietzsche, a lot about Nietzsche, about the power of life in a way, the energy of power of life.
I see.
And so it was very different about phenomenology because phenomenology was more about description.
Mm.
And so it was different, but at the same time, it was two philosophies that they wanted to think about the daily life in a way and the
Mm.
daily experience.
And would you, in your own work, would you see this as an essentially post-modern turn in your thinking, in that it becomes more subjective, more to do with, as you say, lived experience?
Yeah,
And I guess the question that's on my mind is this because in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there's this idea that we are in a crisis and we need to design philosophies that help us navigate through these crises?
yeah. It was a big crisis. It was about environmental crisis,
Hmm.
but also about politic crisis. And what was a place for the body, what was a place for the not a universal point of view about things, but to work with multiplicities of point of view. Because when we speak about experience, it means we accept to work with subjectivity, process of subjectivation, and and so to accept singularity and to accept multiplicity of things. So it was it was a huge turn about uh, the trend of Occidental philosophy with Platon and so on, idealist thinking in a way, and to try to find universal point of view. It was a turn about not. It's not so easy to it's not enough to think about the universal because we have a plurality and universal at the same time.
I've wondered about this for a while because I've noted in the course of making this podcast that there is more and more an interest expressed in the idea of finding what we might think of as truth. A lot of
Yeah.
people seem to be seeking for some form of answer.
Yeah.
And it seems to me to struggle in the face of pluralism and postmodern kind of multiplicity. How do you, I suppose, balance these two things out? This need for an idea of a governing order and this notion of plurality and multiplicity.
Yeah, that's a big. It's very paradoxal because this the idea of a universal truth for everybody everywhere uh, was in crisis, and so the always in philosophy the question is more important than the answer. With every philosophy, in a way, the questioning is more important than to find a solution. But at the same time, what the crisis of the politics and of ethics in the 20th century made that the truth was more in question as an universal, of course, but also to in a way to take in consideration the question of the existential point of view, and so at the same time the multiplicity. But it doesn't mean that we have nothing to share together, of course. And so it was to find in a way between order and chaos. And this question of chaos and the cosmos uh, was very important in the teaching of my my huge master Madinet uh, about this, and also with Deleuze and his friend Guattari wrote a book about cosmos in a way to the meeting between chaos and cosmos, the between chaos and order in a way. And so it's very strong in philosophy, but at the same time, for me, it was the beginning of when I met architecture. It was very, very strong for me because in architecture, the architects and the landscaper and the urbanist, and they have to find order in a way, to develop order. And it's not enough to have question, to have problematics. And so what, as you say, what is how to be in a practical philosophy in a way is very interesting because it was not only a question of theoretical point of view, but also practical point of view.
Yes. And I think to get to some of the themes of the books, and it's a beautifully rich book, 17 chapters, I think, 17 short essays.
Yeah, very short.
It has probably got the greatest first chapter title I've ever come across in an architecture book, which is Making the World as an Act of Resisting Against the Unbearable, which I think is a very exciting idea. Could you tell me a little bit about this idea of resistance? You seem to argue to me that architecture is an act of resistance against degradation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you talk about the work of Leclésio, who was new to me.
Yeah.
And you use this as a way of sort of framing architecture's ethical responsibility.
Yeah.
To go back to this idea of multiplicity, this responsibility towards cohabitation. Perhaps you could sort of talk to this idea of resistance, first of all.
Yeah, I think this question of resistance is a lot about consideration, about what is happening, and about this sort of exhaust the world, the earth, but also the individual is exhausted in a way because something is too much, too much, too much uniformization, too much generalities in a way, too much exploitation. And so the resistance is a lot about this question of singularities, about the becoming, about the openness, and of course the multiplicity. And that's why architecture of existence. It was a title I was thinking a lot about what title for this different little essay. You were right, in fact. And I think what I learned in philosophy and also in architecture that we share the question of habitation. What does it mean to inhabit? To inhabit the city, to inhabit a landscape, to inhabit a house, to inhabit the world, the world, and so on. And so to connect, to inhabit and to exist, to inhabit and existence is a way to resist in a way, because it means we have to consider, to have consideration for this what is human in a fact, what's about human beings, it's something about the intelligence, of course, but it's also about the affect. The subjectivity is affective also, but also it's a question of value. And so the resistance, in a way, is a lot to refuse homogenization and capitalism of things, in a way. And in a way, it will be communism also. It's to refuse what it means to have only one way of thinking, on one way to develop societies. And so it's to resist to uniformity, homogenization. And at the same time, is to resist about to separate everything. And even about in university, because when I began to be a teacher in school of architecture, at university, I found a big division between disciplines. And so the interdisciplinarity is also a way to resist. That's why in my essay, I try to work with architecture, of course, with landscape, with ecology, with literature, with philosophy. And it will be very interesting to work with other disciplines. But what is important is to avoid to be only in one way of thinking. Because it means to separate things as if it was possible. And it's totally impossible in architecture to avoid humanities, to be only technical, to be only a question of money. And so I think the resistance is a lot about the philosophy is a possibility to destroy, of course, but it's possibility to resist. And I think phenomenology was a way of resisting against a universal point of view. And Deleuze is a way of resist to give us some idea to resist. You know that I think that's very important to pay attention to the idea and the possibility we have to think by together and by oneself at the same time. So resistance for me is a lot about to find to have critical point of view, but not only critical point of view, also to find to insist, to highlight the importance of relationalities between things. Mm-hmm. This question not to separate, but to link. What's about relationalities? And so that's a big resistance. It makes a big change. And Leclésio is a very big writer because I hope you have time once to read it, but maybe you don't like because it's very special. But what is very interesting with Leclésio that he is fostering cohabitation. The question is how it's possible to cohabit. In a way, it's animist literature. It's a kind of animism, a new kind of animism. And so it's how it's possible to cohabit between human beings and non-human beings. And so is writing a lot about trees, about the sea, about the clouds, about the children, about the poor people. And what I find it so fantastic with Leclésio, that he helps us to resist to be attracted only by richness, power, people, and so on. And he works about the beauty of vulnerability. What's the most important, I find, in Leclésio, that he helps to find new ways of relating with everything, with minerality, plants, animals, but at the same time, we share the beauty of things. And so that's fantastic, and that's so something we can share in philosophy. Deleuze, the question of beauty is very important, and for phenomenology too, and for architecture too. I think for human beings it's very important, and of course the beauty is something we look for. We have no truth about this, but that's something we feel. That's something we search in a way. We look for beauty, and so Leclésio has this life force, and he has this poetry force.
Yes, and I do very much like this idea of the sacred quality of the experience of being a human, which, as you say, has a certain animistic quality to it.
Yeah.
And is very elegant. As you were talking at the beginning there, I was interested in this idea of who we are resisting. Is there an agency or a mindset, or is the resistance that we are called to make against not so much an entity or a body of people or a person, so much as a natural or inbuilt tendency towards this alienation that I think you're talking about, this characteristic of modernity, of isolating things, separating things.
Yeah.
So it's not that there's an evil person making us
No,
isolated, so much that we have a tendency to what? Is that right? Am I right in thinking that? Or is that a little bit of a naive idea?
no, I share what you explain. I think that to resist to separation, to resist to alienation, is to connect with the secret of life, with the secret of our existence, with the secret of what we feel when we have the sense of beauty.
Hmm.
And so we don't know exactly what it is. We don't know at all what it is, but we can speak about it. And we every time we begin again and again about this question. And when we see uh, about the caverns, the drawings in caverns, when we see ants in the caverns, we feel something very strong. We don't know why it's so strong, but we know that uh, we in a way we are in it's something very strong. We are living with things.
Mm.
That's very very important, this question, to live with, living with things. You know that this year I am happy to be part of the Biennale of Venice with the Pavilion of France. I was invited by the commissaire of this pavilion, and the thematic we work together is living with.
Mm.
And living with is perfect for architectures of existence,
Mm.
and is perfect for l'Ecclesio in a way,
Yes.
because uh, that's when we are the animist literature in a way is how it's possible to describe how we live with everything in a way. And for me, phenomenology and Deleuze, they try to find what does it mean to live with,
Mm.
and not against, and not separated and isolated. And so the question of secret is very, very interesting. And as explained by Leclésio, he doesn't want to, he is not looking for a paradise, but he's looking for inhabit the earth, the planet Earth. So that's fantastic. And
Mm.
I think it's what I found working in architecture with my students, with my colleagues, is a lot about what does it mean to inhabit? How do we, what about heritage, but what about we are going to invent to coexist and to cohabit
Mm.
with everything. So it's not easy to answer, but what is fantastic with architecture as poesy and so on, it's always in situ, it's always to reinvent somewhere.
Yes. The book sort of presents an argument, well, and correct me if I'm wrong, I often am, that architecture can be viewed as an ontological art form. Now, I've heard architecture described as a social art before.
Yeah,
What do you mean by an ontological art form? And I suppose this comes to the word aesthetics in your title. Like Leclésio's description of beauty, there's this strong impetus around the idea of the aesthetic of beauty. That architecture is not just representative of, in a
yeah,
sort of more Marxian sense, power or power relationships, but is in fact the form of architecture. Architecture is a disciplining thing in its own right. And the expression of architecture makes the human subject. And so I'm interested in this idea of what you mean by this.
yes, yes. It's a strange. It's about this semantic is very. Um it's very philosophical in a way, because it's question of ontological. It means what is about the secret of things in a way,
Hmm.
and so uh, in a modern philosophy, or with Plato, Aristotle, they try to explain something about the secret of things, of course. But for me, this question of ontological art forms is a lot about the experience space, experience of time, of space, experience of spatiality, experience of temporality. It's better to say like this, beyond its functional aspects. And so, in a way, is to to think about the crisis of places. There is a big crisis about places. In Greek, we say topos.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the topophilia is in crisis because of the devastation of the places. And so, what is this ontological art form, in a way, is a lot about considering the way we inhabit the Earth, the planet Earth. And so it's a leap, it's a bifurcation to think about places as milieu, as living milieu. And so it's this question about living milieu, places as living milieu, is something very important for us today about the life of plants, the life of animals, the life of humans. And so it's not only, and so it's a question for architecture and for philosophy, much more than before.
Yes.
And it was something for religion before and today yet. But this ontological art form is to think about places, about topos, as milieu and not as decor, not as shows, not as monuments only. And they are alive. They are alive, and we live with this. And this is very fragile. And so the ontological turn, in a way, is about fragility, about vulnerability. And it's something, it's not sad, it's something we rediscover. I think it's something we rediscover, it's our responsibility. And so it's a lot about to find new possibilities of linking things, new possibility about caring instead of dominating. That's a fantastic turn in a way, because it's not the power who is the most important. What the most important is the vulnerability and the interdependencies of things.
Yes.
And so that's, it means it's so different. You see, it means being together, living in common, living with. That's transform our ways of thinking, acting, feeling. And for architecture, of course, that's a new compass for me.
Yes.
It's a new compass.
You use this word homogenization.
Yeah.
And in your chapter 5, you talk about this idea of milieus and the homogenization of urban landscape.
Yeah.
Could we see homogenization in a way as a form of sterilization? Is what you're arguing against is the sterility of contemporary architecture? That it sterilizes, it kills off the biological and environmental and cultural complexity and richness, which is not always easy. And I think perhaps that's at the heart of it, isn't it? Is that the contemporary urban environment is designed to be secure or safe.
Yeah.
And this is very, very isolating. It's very alienating.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is this idea? Do you think there is some relationship to this idea of sterility?
Yes, yes, totally. I would like to have this English language to be able to answer with precision what you say, because I find this word very, very interesting. What I try to say, because it's about, as you explain, sterilization about biodiversity, about ecosystem, but at the same time, it's sterilization about creativity, about joy of life in a
Yeah,
way.
yeah.
And so it's something very very strong, because the people, what is terrible in a way, that it's sterilizing milieu of biodiversity, but at the same time is sterilizing the pleasure to be together with other culture, with
Mm.
other human beings, and so on. Because we know we develop because of this willing of security, we develop security to be safe, but at the same time to want to develop so much comfort.
Mm.
At the same time, maybe we develop more security, more comfort, but we lose the pleasure to be with others.
Mm-hmm.
The and we forget our responsibility not to destroy what is around us.
Mm.
That's and we forgot the fragilities of things, and we forgot the gratitude we must have to be able to survive, to live because of others,
Mm.
because we eat other living beings, and so we need them to be alive.
Mm.
But how it's possible to respect things? So this question of attention, consideration, respect, um, uh, I don't know how we say in English, la douceur, douceur, it's a mildness, but I don't know exactly. When sometimes we say, with a baby, we try to be gentle.
I think it's an amazing idea. Plenty of the listeners to the podcast will know this word, and hopefully someone will be able to write in and tell me. This changes the relationship of the architect to architecture.
Yeah,
An architect isn't just somebody who works for a client and represents the client's needs and desires because they have the money and they're paying, and therefore you do what you're told.
yeah.
Instead, an architect has this in your reading of the crisis and our responsibility, and this beautiful idea, these two beautiful ideas of multiplicity and vulnerability. And I think that's a fascinating word for architects to consider. But the architect has this huge role now, an enormous responsibility.
Yes, yes, yes. And of course, he has to answer to the client. Of course, he has to, but he has at the same time the responsibility is in charge of something bigger than the client. He
Mm.
has to answer, but at the same time to be responsibility with his disciplines. With discipline, it means to take care of the earth
Mm.
and to take care of vulnerability. It's
Mm.
not enough to give the answer for the client. So he has to find an answer for the client, and at the same time not to destroy
Mm.
everything, because and sterilizing things,
Mm.
because we know that a lot of people, a lot of projects, of modern projects, they made big infrastructures, but at the same time they destroyed things. And we know that today we have to inherit about these things,
Mhm.
and we don't know how it will be possible to feed the humanity and so on. And so the responsibility of architects is not only to answer to the client. Of course, it's to answer to the client because it's its job, but at the same time, is to answer as an architect. And so it means about this question of tecton and about the secret of arche. What is the secret of arche? And I think today the turn of secret of arche is firmitas, vetustas, venustas, the three big question of things, but at the same time is the life and the the spatial justice too. This question of spatial justice is very important. And for me, when I wrote this book, if and I hope I will do a second one, I try to prepare something about a little philosophy of synergies. Is a lot about the question of caring turn. For me, really, this ontologic art form is a caring turn for architecture. And so what does it mean for architecture to care? How is it possible to care in architecture? We know what does it mean when we are a nurse, when we are a father or a mother to take care of a baby or of someone who is sick. But what does it mean when we are architect to take care of something, to take care of place? Because the crisis of place is a crisis of the multiplicity of places, singularity of places.
Yes.
And so what is very, I read, and in my laboratory we work about a book, an anthropologist, her name is Plumwood, and she wrote a book, very interesting book about the ecological crisis of reason. The ecological crisis of reason. That's very interesting because, in a way, she works about an ontological art form to rethink the question of reason. What is the architectural reason? What is the philosophical reason in this caring term?
In chapter 10, you talk about women at the heart of human life.
Yeah.
Do you think this caring turn and this idea of femininity, of womanhood, do you think that they're in your own thinking and practice and in your analysis of contemporary architecture and urbanism and architectural practice is, in a way, a demand for greater voice for women in the ways that we design and in the things that we design?
Yes, I think so. I think we must give attention and give place for the woman in the city. And so it's very important that some movement in different continents everywhere um, fight for these rights, reclaiming in a way these rights. That's very important. But for me, what is very interesting is it's all this willing about inclusive and democratic environments. Because in fact, what is about this ecofeminism, it was a beginning and it was against alienation, against anthropocentrism, androcentrism, against the power of man against woman. But in fact, it's not woman against men. It's the question to fight together for multiplicity of genders, at the same time for a common inclusive and democratic environments to have rights for everybody. And so it's a political approach, very important one, because in fact, when we read there is a lot of movement in ecofeminism, very different between them. but every time it's to think about the commons. That's really something very. We reconsider the question of commons, and so that's very very important because we have to reconsider the place, and we have to reconsider the commons.
Yeah.
Because we know that we have this separation with these gated communities, with this um, uh,
Ghettos.
yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are too much exclusion. We need to create a narratives of hospitality.
Mm.
And that's what I learned with all these movements in ecofeminism. It was fights, political fights for vulnerabilities of human beings, and
Mm.
but also for forests,
Mm.
also for a lot of things, in fact.
Yeah.
And so that's very interesting because what is developed in this with these movements is about spatial justice.
Mm.
It's about empathy. What does it mean? It's about
Mm.
cooperation,
Mm.
and not only competition. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very relevant for architecture.
Yes, for sure. A final question.
Yeah.
Do you have an example where you feel such ideas are spatialized, are made manifest in the built environment? Is this a form of architecture that historically has existed, for example, in traditional communities, indigenous communities? Or is it something that we've always pertained to? You mention, I think, in the last chapter, the idea of Eden,
Yes.
which I think Joseph Reichwer talks about in his wonderful book on Adam's House in Paradise. This idea that Eden is the place to which our vision of what it means to be a human in communion in the world is realized. And we hunger for this. Do we have a version in the world that isn't Eden?
No, no, I haven't. I haven't. I never met it. I would like to. I dream. I have a dream that architects help to to reinvent. But at least the idea of something would could be possible because you know what is we need to resist and we need to hope
Mm,
to resist and the joy of things and the hope of things is very very important. So it's not about utopia. I don't it's I don't I am interested, of course, by this question of utopia, but that's not the question because in architecture we what is very interesting we and in philosophy too, is to try to think what we live about,
mm,
what is about what we are living. And the challenge is to reconstruct, in a way, condition of regenerations of milieu. What I think that we destroyed things.
mm,
Really, I think we destroyed the earth because we were very powerful as human beings with our technical and scientific power and with the power of capitalism and communism another time. And so it was very destroying things. And
mhm,
so the Eden really is a hope. Is hope. It's possible for human beings to reinvent a new compass,
mm,
a caring compass. I don't know what does it mean, this caring compass, but I would what I want to develop in this book if I have time to write it because I have no more so much time, but it's a lot about welcoming, about hospitality. It's a lot about repairing, regenerating. You know, it's a lot about tuning things
mm,
and it's to try to find some harmony between things, and I think it's possible. I think it's very difficult, but I think it's possible because we have to accept we we have to develop cohabitation.
Mm-hmm.
We have to develop cohabitation. It's simple. This interdependency is the way we have to think about, to create about, and to find beauty. That's why it's so much about ethics, about aesthetics, as we said, about politics, because it's impossible to separate them in philosophy as in architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to imagine it's possible. That's why the hidden is the possibility of something and not the end of everything, or only the possibility for a few human beings to go to Mars. It's not enough to dream.
That's a beautiful and a wonderful place to finish. Thank you so very, very much, Chris. It's been an absolute privilege.
I thank you very much. I was so happy you invited me. I am grateful, really, totally grateful. I'm sorry for my English. I am sorry to be late. I was in advance to be on time, but I could. It was impossible, but at least it was possible.
Two quotes come to mind pertinent to this discussion. I don't eat no meat, no dairy, no sweets. Only ripe vegetables, fresh fruit and whole wheat. And tell your crew use the H2O in wise amounts, because it's deep, way deep, deeper than Atlantis, deeper than the seafloor travelled by the mantis. In order, Dead Prez and Mostaf, both on the money as expected. Thank you to Chris for joining me on this here platform, my very own Legion of Honour. Thanks as ever to Routledge for giving me a real book. Please see the podcast description for links to it, where you can buy it, and should. It's amazing. And to Chris's professional profile. And thanks for listening.